some people tuning in online as well, so welcome to them. Today is one of our monthly Books and Bagels sessions. It's a session, it's an interdisciplinary conversation that we have once a month, hosted by the Office of Graduate Studies, which is where I'm from, and the Graduate Student Association. Today we've come to the Center City campus, as we do usually once per term, to invite our CNHP students to talk a little bit about what they do, and then also to get some faculty insight, and also to hear from all of you and some of the questions, challenges, experiences that you've had in your journey so far. So we hope that you'll find some common ground among one another. And with that, and by the way, my name is Sandra Bolus, and I'm the Office Manager with Grad Studies. And we also have Dr. Tech Lim, who's here from the Office of Grad Studies. And then my student assistant is in the back there, Anne. And then we have Maggie Gordon from Student Affairs here in Center City. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce our moderator for today's session, Dr. Stella Volpe. You all know her very well, I think, at this point, so I don't have to say much more than that. And then we will have our first speaker after Dr. Stella Volpe. Sorry, yep, there she is. And then we will, sorry, I was looking, I'm like, she's not there.
I got younger.
Yes, she did. Then we'll have two speakers talk a little bit about what they do, and then if you could, we'll save all of our questions and conversation for the end, unless you have something really pressing that you would like to hear from one of our speakers. So we should wrap up by about 1 o'clock today, and as always, help yourself to all of the food. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And she said, Dr. Stella Volpe, and Sandra, I know her just literally by email. She sends out to all the grad faculty, and so it's just so neat to see her and meet her today. And I said, I thought she was much older. Dr. Lim, I did. And Dr. Lim, the fact that he's here is pretty impressive. He's a very busy man. He's not only the Vice Provost for Graduate Studies, but he is a physics professor too. And then I also want to introduce someone else, Dr. Nancy Gerber, who's a professor in creative arts therapies, where Donna Radl is from, and she's going to present her work. So I'm really just here for fluff. I don't count. The two speakers really count, and then we'll just talk at the end. But I'm so grateful to see so many of our students, and I know we have some other students here, which is great. So the first speaker is Donna Radl, who is a PhD candidate in creative arts therapies, who will be defending her dissertation in 2 weeks, she just told me. So welcome, Dr. Radl.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm going to be presenting. Can everyone hear me okay? So I'm presenting on the effects of self-book art therapy on emotional distress in female cancer patients. This is a randomized controlled trial. The purpose of the study is to examine and to evaluate the effects of self-book art therapy. The purpose of this study was to evaluate the effects of self-book art therapy in emotional distress and psychological well-being in female cancer patients during active treatment. And that was surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. So to start with, and I started this research 2 years ago, longevity amongst cancer patients has actually created some new challenges within the healthcare system. Research has indicated that up to 43% of women undergoing treatment, cancer treatment, and who have been diagnosed with cancer are experiencing emotional distress, and that's abnormal levels of emotional distress. So anything rated at a 4 or above, and I'll explain this later, excuse me, in the presentation. So an abnormal level is what we're talking about for emotional distress. National surveys also indicated that there was an unmet need amongst these patients, and the #1 unmet need was the psychosocial needs, specifically emotional distress. So this caused national concerns. This also caused some national mandates. And again, this was 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, the government came out, it was actually the National Comprehensive Cancer Network came out and said by the year of 2015, all hospitals treating cancer need to have some type of program in place to be able to not only assess, but to treat emotional distress. also at the same time, a lot of research has been devoted to looking at the immune system and to be able to understand that by decreasing stress, patients are actually able to cope better with cancer and be able to boost their immune system. So early intervention is pertinent. So less stress, they adapt better, and they also have been shown to have better treatment compliance with their oncology treatments. So there were 3 gaps identified in the research. The first gap was that art therapy needed some rigorous quantitative studies conducted. Prior to 2 years ago, there were only 6 randomized controlled trials ever done using art therapy with cancer patients. The second gap was that the self-book art therapy, which is what I'm studying, needed scientific validation. And then the third gap, art therapy in general, art therapy interventions need evidence-based best practice standards. So those were the 3 gaps that I'm trying to fill. So the method. So repeated measures, randomized controlled trial. 60 women in active treatment were randomly selected and assigned to either the self-book art therapy group, and I'll explain that in a minute, and also the standard care control group. So it equaled out, it was 30 and 30. 2 variables were measured, so I have 2 main variables. Emotional distress, as I've been talking about already, and the second variable is psychological well-being. Important to point out here that psychological well-being included 5 domains, or 5 subscales. So the 5 subscales were emotional, social, physical, functional, and spiritual well-being. So I'm also looking at those variables as well. So the inclusion criteria, I screened all 60 patients with the chronoscopy physical functionality scale and also with the distress thermometer. All 60 patients were IRB approved through the 2 different IRBs. All participants were 18 and older, English speaking, and attending active oncology treatment across the street at Hahnemann University. It's connected, Hahnemann University Hospital. And with no mental illness and no current substance abuse disorders. So the 2 randomized groups. Group 1, the art therapy group, consisted of 6 50-minute one-on-one private art therapy sessions. No prior art therapy skills were required. They created a book. So I have a little example here. They actually created a physical book that they all got to keep in the end. It's a small, manageable book. It has 5 sections. And the self-book is an integration of art therapy with positive psychology. The standard care group was treatment as usual, and that was defined by Hahnemann University's Cancer Center. And that included all the emotional support services. So it also included art therapy, music therapy, massage therapy, acupuncture therapy. So the only difference, and again, this is important to remember, the only difference between the 2 groups is that group number 1 made a book. So there were 4 data collection points. Phase 1, time 1 was phase 1, time 2 was week 3, time 3 was week 6, and then 6 weeks later I did a follow-up. So the 4th time point was 1 to 2 months later. And all 4 times that I met with the patients, 4 instruments were administered. And I'll talk about those. The first, so each instrument, there was a short form and a long form. The short form is the distress thermometer, and here again, important to point out that a 4 was needed to be able to even be eligible. And this is on a scale of 0 to 10. So 0 meaning no stress, 10 meaning severe stress. And the perceived emotional distress inventory went into a little more depth. That also measured emotional distress, but it went into a few more questions. Actually, it was 12 questions, specifically what's causing you stress. By the way, all 4 instruments were standardized instruments, so they all had high sensitivity and high validity. The 3rd instrument, now this is measuring the psychological well-being. This was another government form, the Patient-Reported Outcome Measurement Information System, and the acronym is PROMISE. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's an online tool that's free that all people can use, where you pick and choose questions to be able to make your own to measure your own outcome. So I made my own in paper form, and I'm calling it PROMISE Brief Psychological Wellbeing Test. And that's the short form. The long form for psychological well-being is the Functional Assessment of Chronic Illness Therapy, and the acronym for that is FACSM. You might be familiar with it. It's a very well-used, respected instrument. And it has different versions, and the version that I used was the spirituality. The reason why I use spirituality is in research, it has been determined that not a lot of research has been conducted in this area, and that it's very critical for, specifically for cancer patients, terminal patients, and patients with chronic illnesses. But I was lucky enough to find this instrument. And again, all 4 instruments are standardized. So I had 2 hypotheses, and each one addressed both variables. So this is that all female cancer patients in the art therapy, self-book art therapy group will experience emotional distress that's significantly different than those in the standard care group. The second hypothesis is that all female cancer patients in the self-book art therapy group will experience psychological well-being scores that are significantly different than those in the standard care group. So the data analysis. In the end, I had 40 complete sets of data. All were analyzed using repeated measures, ANOVA, to compare change over time. Also, the ANCOVA was also used to be able to look and examine group differences after adjusting for any baseline differences. Did additional analyses to be able to look at relationships between the variables and to be able to examine group differences after adjusting for confounding variables. There was some narrative data, 2 open-ended questions. One was a pre-question, so this is pre-randomization. All 60 patients got asked the question, what do you hope to get from this art therapy study? The second question, and this is the post question, and only the art therapy patients were asked this one. Please describe your experience with the self-book. All the answers were to the questions were transcribed by me verbatim and analyzed. So the results, and I'm going to go in order of the 4 instruments. The first instrument, the DT, the stress thermometer, I put it out here that from time 1, where we start with a 6.20, we end up with 3.80. And the reason why I'm highlighting this 3.80 is, guess what number is below? The 4, right. So patients in the art therapy group actually had distress scores that were below clinical concern. And it was about 30% of them, compared to 10% in the control group. And again, that's on a scale of 0 to 10. However, there was no statistical difference between the 2 groups in terms of the differences in the scores. I did look at the effect size of the treatment. I wanted to see how effective was the self-book on emotional distress, and I got a score of a 0.4 0.41, and that is per Cohen's guidelines. The second instrument, the PD, this is the longer version, you can see where both groups, you want to see the score go down. So you want to see distress go down, and it does. But unfortunately, it goes down in both groups. It goes from 15 to 10. And this is on a scale, a different inventory range of 0 to 45. And again, no significant difference between the two groups. Therefore, I was unable to reject the first null hypothesis. But we do have an effect size here that's a little bit larger. We're almost hitting the medium effect size, although it's still in the small range of 0.47 for effectiveness. So now we're moving on to the second variable, first instrument. Here, this is a totally different scale. So in emotional distress, you want to see the scores drop, right? In psychological well-being, you want to see the scores go up. You want to see quality of life enhanced. So here we have, we see it go up a little bit in the art therapy group. It actually goes down in the control group, but no significant difference between the groups. And we have even a lower effect size, we have a 0.37. Moving on to the last instrument, the FACSM, and again, you want the scores to go up. And this is on a different range, a 0 to 156 range. Here you have, they do go up. They go up, and it looks like they go up a fair amount, but again, they also go up in the control group. And once again, no significant difference between groups. And an even lower effect size. So we're down to a 0.25 for the effectiveness of the self-book on psychological well-being. So I looked at one subscale, I looked at the spirituality subscale, and here the range is a little different. We're looking at 0 to 45. And you see that the scores go up pretty high here, and they actually go down. The spiritual well-being in the control group, the scores were lower, not as good. And we finally have some significance. So we've got a 0.20. Significance is my p-value. And the effect size is pretty effective. We're up to a solid medium. So we have a 0.55 effect size for spiritual well-being. The additional analyses, and again, this doesn't affect my hypotheses, so I was unable to accept either of the hypotheses. So I had to go with the null. So here, or I was unable to reject the null hypotheses. Here, I ran a Pearson correlation coefficient test, and I wanted to understand what is the actual relationship between psychological well-being and emotional distress. And it was interesting, I found that there was a positive correlation of moderate strain between the two variables. Again, this does not affect the hypothesis. I also ran additional analyses on age as a co-founder. And here I did repeated measures of ANOVA 3-factor was used to examine the effect of the intervention on emotional distress and psychological well-being while adjusting for age. And there was a significant difference of a 0.04 over time. So these findings, what does it mean? The findings mean that the effect of the self-book versus the standard care was more evident in the younger patients. And here, my patients were between the ages of 22 and 83. And so I had to break it up into 3 groups to be able to look at the confounding variable. And it turns out that in the group, the youngest group, art therapy was more effective. And again, it doesn't affect my hypotheses, but this is new knowledge, and I think it's pretty interesting knowledge. content analysis. So the pre-question, a substantial proportion of women hope to feel less stressed, relaxation, and peace of mind. That's why they volunteered for the study, which is interesting. And the post-question, and this is 6 weeks after they created one of these self-books, the majority of the self-book participants were they reported having a similar experience. 5 key areas: positive thoughts and emotions, discovery through the art therapy process, experience feelings of calmness and less stress, existential thoughts, reconnection with self and others, especially with family. So there's a lot of limitations in this study. The first one, it was limited to women only to achieve a homogeneous population. Also, there was not a lot of diversity. We had 80% African American, 10% white, no Asian. I cannot generalize these results. The results are being seen through my own lens. I'm a post-positivist, pragmatist, and that comes along with its own bias assumptions. Also, the art therapy intervention, there's inherent bias assumptions with the art therapy intervention as well. The small sample size was probably my biggest limitation. I only had 60 participants with an 18% attrition rate. That included 6 deaths unrelated to the study. So the study may have been underpowered. It was not a blinded study because of the limited number of study personnel. So I was putting on a lot of hats. And the method excluded the investigation of a human relational variable. So we really, if we were able to capture that, the results maybe would have been different. So theoretical implications. The results may shed new light on the connection between spirituality, creativity, and art therapy. All involve a meditative or reflective quality that provide a possible healing factor. Just a quick quote. This is a quote from one of the participants after she finished her book. It's hard to explain, but sitting here doing this book, it was like my spirit had left, and it was like all the stuff that I had been going through during a time when I had just started it. It made me feel more in control of my life. Here I want to just point out this is the art therapy process. So the patient, and it goes clockwise, so just follow with me clockwise here. The patient comes in, meets with the art therapist, the board-certified art therapist, who actually wasn't me. We had a person volunteer to do that. These are not in my slide. I don't know what all these are. So the computer's making some characters that aren't really there. So ignore them. So the patient comes in, meets with the art therapist, is given the art therapy directive for the day. And then that's about 5 minutes. Then the next 30 minutes, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on, it was very important, was the meditative process, where the patient is actually trying to respond to the art therapy directive by picking pre-cut images, magazine images, that she wants to use that explains or expresses how she feels about the particular topic. So each week there's a different therapeutic topic, and she does that for about 30 minutes. Then the next 10 minutes, she actually starts to assemble the book, one section of the book each week. So she's assembling the book, and then in the last 5 minutes, she rejoins with the art therapist to share with the art therapist what she made and to be able to talk to the therapist and explain the meaning of the different images. Why did she select what she selected? And I'm obviously simplifying the therapeutic process for the sake of time. It's a lot more involved than that, but just to give you an idea of sort of the breakout of the time frame. So the reflective process appears to lead to a transcendent state that seems to cultivate imagination. The process is happening while the pre-cut images or triggering memories of past experiences such as life before cancer. And I say that because these are actual words from the patients in terms of their experience with making the book. After the transcendent state ends, the participant creates a section of the book and then rejoins the art therapist in a verbal discussion about the individual meaning of the images. For oncology patients, thinking constructively about issues in a way to find coherent meaning about personal situations in cancer. Reflection on personal strengths can yield significant benefits and is closely correlated with post-traumatic growth. Repetitive thinking can help to reframe the cancer diagnosis, providing new meaning for an aversive situation. Another quote, my experience was uplifting and enlightening. It put me in touch with myself and where I am. I had a lot of fun, I had good thoughts. It gave me a chance to think about myself and my feelings and emotions. It made me aware of others and how far I've come and where they are, and to be a better me, and to not be upset, angry, fearful, or afraid. So finally, based on the 10 months of research, one theory is that during the art therapy, the creative process acts as a portal to an alternate level of consciousness. The different levels may create a space where creativity and spirituality connect. The experience can be enlightening. So, based on my research, future recommendations are to have a mixed methods research model, something that includes this qualitative part where we can really look at the lived experience. Also, future research studies should have larger sample size and more diversity. And they should evaluate the generalizability of the intervention and focus on the therapeutic mechanisms of art therapy, self-book art therapy, especially spirituality. So in summary, results suggest that the self-book art therapy may help decrease emotional distress and enhance spiritual well-being in female cancer patients during active oncology treatment. Positive trends were in the data, which were present, but there were no statistically significant differences between the groups for the two main variables. Only small treatment effects were found for self-book art therapy on participants' psychological well-being. One subscale measure revealed statistically significant greater improvements in self-book art therapy participants' spiritual well-being compared to the control group. Narrative data supports these findings and indicate that the emotional needs were met in the majority of the self-book art therapy participants. Self-book revealed a small to moderate effect size, with 30% of art therapy participants ended below the clinical range of emotional distress, compared to only 5% of the standard care control participants, indicating that self-book art therapy treatment was able to affect meaningful change in emotional distress. The field of medical art therapy has now an additional randomized control trial that meets evidence-based standard practice standards that include a small to moderate effect size for treating emotional distress. And I just want to end with a couple quotes. This was a 52-year-old woman, stage 3 cancer, fighting homelessness last winter. She shared, after creating her own self-book, she shared, it really put me in touch with my inner self and to draw strength from within. The references, special acknowledgments, my dissertation chair, Dr. Yoko Brock, my committee, Dr. Gerber, Dr. Hardy, Dr. Komanicki, and Dr. Moore. Final thanks to the 60 courageous women from Honolulu University Hospital, and also the National Endowment for the Arts for funding my research. And with this quote, I experience the strengthening in my character. Thank you.
So I forgot to say questions are at the end after both, just in case. So keep those in your head if you have any for Donna. And I'll come up and actually formally introduce you, but I didn't want anybody to jump in and say. So our next presenter is actually one of my graduate students. Emily Werner is a first-year master's student, and this is an introduction to what will become likely her master's thesis, which we've started already. So I won't say much about it because she'll talk about it. Emily, tell you.
Thank you, Dr. Volpe. So as she said, my name is Emily, and today I'm going to be talking to you about an ongoing study happening in the Nutrition Sciences Department that involves the measurement of fitness variables of master's athletes. You may be wondering what a master's athlete is, and the answer to that depends on the type of physical activity that's involved. Every sport has its own definition of master's athletes, so for the purpose of this study, we also had to define our own criteria, which we did by describing a master's athlete as someone who is at least 26 years of age and exercises at least 4 or more days per week. Although the number of competitive master's athletes has greatly increased over the past 3 decades, there's a scarcity of research on the fitness profiles of this population. This information is very useful to these athletes because it can be used to determine physical conditioning programs or dietary recommendations for performance improvement. Due to this paucity of research, we've decided that the purpose of this study is going to be to compare physical fitness profiles of master's athletes in the Philadelphia region. Certain measurements that we will be looking at, examining, will include maximal oxygen consumption, body composition, dietary intake, physical activity levels, and resting metabolic rate. I will explain each of these individually. So the first variable is maximal oxygen consumption, also known as Vo2 Max, which is a measure of a person's cardiovascular fitness. It is measured in liters of oxygen consumed per minute during an exercise test, usually done on a treadmill or a cycle ergometer. And a higher Vo2 max correlates to a higher level of aerobic fitness. So this here is a picture of one of my fellow graduate students, Brianna, demonstrating a Vo2 max test. You can see that she's fitted with a vest and a mask. The vest has a battery pack and a transmitter pack connected to it, which are both connected to the mask that's covering her nose and mouth, which allows the system to measure her breathing and oxygen consumed and carbon dioxide expelled. Then that information is transmitted to a nearby laptop during the test. The test takes approximately 12 minutes and consists of the researcher increasing the incline and or speed of the treadmill while the person is on it. Then at the end of this test, we have a reliable measure of a person's aerobic fitness. The second variable we are measuring is body composition, which consists of a person's muscle mass, body fat, and bone mineral density. Body composition is an important measure of a fitness profile because it's often related to a person's ability or agility, speed, and often athletic performance. So an athlete strives to have a greater muscle mass than fat mass, however, a healthy balance is important. There are multiple ways to measure body composition, the gold standards of which being dual X-ray or dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, or DEXA. The second of which is a bod pod, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a large round pod that someone sits in to be measured. And the third is hydrostatic weighing, which is done underwater. For the purpose of this study, we use a DEXA machine, which we are lucky to have in our department. This is a picture of a DEXA machine, and if you were to come in and have your body composition analyzed, you would lay on the machine, and the arm of it scans you from head to toe. The entire scan takes only about 6 minutes, and afterwards we get a readout that looks something like this. So as you can see here, it gives us an analysis, a visual analysis of a person's, the density of their bones along with muscle mass and fat mass, while also showing statistical data on the right that correlates to each of those methods. The third variable we are investigating is dietary intake, which greatly affects the overall fitness profile of any athlete, and any individual for that matter. There are multiple ways to evaluate dietary intake, some of which are food frequency questionnaire, a 3 or 7 day diet record, or a 24-hour dietary recall. And for the purpose of this study, we use a food frequency questionnaire. So this is a snapshot of the dairy section of a food frequency questionnaire. The subject will come in and sit down and read. Each section under a food group contains commonly eaten foods within that group. So for example, the dairy section shows milk, sour cream, ice cream, butter, yogurt, foods like that. And the subject would then fill in the appropriate bubble next to each food that correlates to the frequency at which they ate that food over the past year of their life. So this, the food frequency questionnaire gives us a good look into someone's habitual dietary practices. The fourth variable we measure is physical activity levels using accelerometers, which an example of one is shown there. Accelerometers are a widely accepted method for quantifying physical activity. They evaluate physical activity at all levels of intensity, so when a person wears it, usually on the wrist, it measures not only how much activity is going on, but at what intensity. So it measures whether they're being sedentary or participating in moderate or vigorous physical activity. We ask subjects to wear it for 24 hours a day for 7 days, and they can wear it in the shower, while working out, while sleeping, basically throughout the entire day. The fifth and final variable we are investigating is resting metabolic rate, or RMR, which is the amount of energy needed to keep your body alive while at rest. It's measured in kilocalories, so that means it is the amount of calories your body needs to continue circulatory and respiratory functions while at rest. RMR accounts for 60 to 75% of a person's daily energy expenditure, or the total amount of calories a person burns in a day. As fitness level increases, RMR also increases, therefore it is a reliable, comparable measure of a person's aerobic fitness. It can be measured in multiple ways, either by using indirect calorimetry or predictive mathematical equations, both of which we utilized in this study. So the indirect calorimetry method is measuring a person's RMR using a metabolic cart, which is shown here. This is actually a picture of what we have in our lab here at Drexel. And if you were to have your RMR analyzed, you would come in after a 12-hour overnight fast and be seated in the chair. The researcher would place a hood over your head that is connected to the metabolic cart, thus allowing the cart to monitor your breathing. For the duration of the test, which is approximately 30 minutes, you would just lie still in the chair, breathing. And at the end of the test, we have a reliable measure of someone's resting metabolic rate. So the second way in which we are measuring RMR is by using predictive mathematical equations. There are many different equations out there, but two of the more common ones are the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation and the Harris-Benedict equation. This is the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation. As you can see, it differs slightly for males and females. However, both utilize a person's weight, height, and age in years within the calculation, as does the Harris-Benedict equation. And again, you can see it varies slightly for males and females. When comparing the results that you get from measuring someone's resting metabolic rate using the metabolic cart, which is a very, very reliable measure, to mathematically predictive equations, which are also reliable, sometimes they don't always match up exactly. Therefore, another purpose of this study will be to compare RMR lab measurements to RMRs predicted by mathematical equations. And we have some preliminary results on this purpose of the study. So this table represents the percentage of males and females in a sample size of 33.
Yep, we're just finishing up. Thank you.
So this table represents the percentage of males and females whose predicted RMRs were close to that of their RMRs measured by the metabolic cart. So as you can see, the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, it was about 88% of females' metabolic cart measurements were similar to that, or excuse me, 80% of females whose equation predicted RMRs were similar to that of their results from the metabolic cart. And it was, you can see it was most effective for the females. When analyzing by how many kilocalories the equations actually overestimated their person's RMR, you can see that the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation overestimated females' RMRs by an average of 26 kilocalories, however, significantly overestimated males by 116. And the Harris-Benedict equation actually significantly overestimated both females and males' RMRs. Based on these results, we have drawn some preliminary conclusions. The first of which being that the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation is a better predictor of RMR than the Harris-Benedict equation in this sample of masters athletes. And the second conclusion being that the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation is a better predictor for females than it is for males in this sample. Based on these results, we hope that a larger data sample could lead to the production of a more specific equation for this population of athletes. I would like to thank certain graduate students for their previous work on this study, the first of which being Jackie Van Groe, Rachel Kelly, Francesco Alicio, and Jillian Hawkins. I'd also like to thank Dr. Stella Volpe for her work on this study, as well as for moderating this session and being my wonderful advisor. I'd also like to thank the Books and Bagels Committee for allowing me to speak today.
I'm so sorry that we have a class in here at 1. Is everyone able, we'll reconvene in the hallway for questions? Does that sound good? So thank you very much.
And before I go, as I mentioned, this is an ongoing study, so if you're intrigued by what I said and you're at least 26 years old and exercise 4 times a week, you should be looking to. Thank you.